We are now officially starting, and I would like to introduce June Porter to kick off tonight's program. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jess, and welcome to everyone to this evening's event, Getting to Affordable Housing, Do the Numbers Work? We would like to begin our meeting by recognizing the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples of Canada. There's traditional stewards of the land. The municipality from where I'm sitting, because we're across multiple towns and county borders, is located within the boundary of Treaty 18, region of 1818, which is the traditional land of the Anishinaabeg, Haudenosaunee, Wendat, Wyandot peoples. I am excited to be opening this event on behalf of the Institute of South Georgian Bay. I am June Porter, and I am a member of the volunteer board of directors of the Institute. For those of you who may not be familiar with the Institute, I'm just going to speak to a few slides to set the context so you're a bit more familiar with us. So as you can see, we are a volunteer-driven, not-for-profit think and do tank. We're harnessing the power of people and place in the Southern Georgian Bay to grow social, environmental, and economic prosperity. We're connecting people, conducting research, we share knowledge, and nurture collaboration at every opportunity. Our website is www.tsigb.com. The Institute, with our work, it is focused on 4 priority areas: that of a green economy, arts and culture, social finance and housing, and business innovation. We have and been working with this year in 2024 partners and sponsors. At a lead level is the Institute of Southern Georgian Bay and the municipality of Meaford. At a supporting level are the towns of Collingwood and the Blue Mountains. At a community level, we have Wasaga Beach. Thank you very much for your continued support. Given we're in the midst of our 2024 program partner campaign, we continue to look for municipal, business, and philanthropic and individual support to ensure that our programming continues, and our programming is free. So I would ask that you join us. First, subscribe to our newsletter so you're up to date every month with what's going on. Join our conversation as you have today. Continue to do that through our events. Or if you're interested, we welcome you to participate in a learning group or design team. And your program support, as I said, ensures that our program remains free for everyone. Again, our website, I encourage you to visit, learn more about us. Look at the recordings of previous events if you haven't attended in the past, and you can take the opportunity there to subscribe to our newsletter. It is now a privilege to hand over to our volunteer chair, who is Rosalind Morris.
Thanks so much, June. Welcome, everyone. It's terrific to see you. I will just set the context for today's event. Really, the goal is to bring all of us together, whether we're residents or business, government, nonprofit, or philanthropic leaders. We're particularly focusing on developers and non-market developers. And we've had a fantastic project working with Rental Rescue and the University of Toronto and the Rotman School of Management on a forma project. And you'll hear a lot about what everyone did through the project and what we've learned together. I want to tell you a little bit, if you're not familiar, about one of our learning groups, which is the Social Finance and Affordable Housing Group. This is a dedicated group who meets monthly and has many meetings in between our monthly catch-up meetings. And we've got a cross-sectoral learning approach which reflects many of our municipalities. We're focused on financial models that can create more affordable housing, in particular for our labor force, for our workers in healthcare, retail, tourism, and hospitality. These sectors are critical to the sustainability of our towns. We've come to the conclusion that we need to be creating a community wealth solution, and that includes all of us. If we can learn more about the new social finance tools that are available and more about non-market affordable housing and increase our municipal engagement, we will be able to collectively create more affordable units in perpetuity. Next slide, please. This group has been meeting for a couple of years, and many of you have been participating in our events. And we thought that this was a great slide. Thank you so much, Marilyn. The iceberg slide that many of you have seen perhaps before, and here's a different context. So this is what we're seeing above the waterline. We're experiencing extraordinary population growth in our municipalities. We've seen increased private investments in secondary homes, Airbnbs, and other places for lots of visitors to come and enjoy our beautiful area. We've seen significantly increased housing prices. We've seen lots of signs and lots of postings indicating that businesses and government is struggling, and nonprofits are struggling to find employees. We're seeing increase in homeless and temporary shelter requirements, increased use of emergency feeding services like food banks. So what are we noticing perhaps below the waterline? Clearly, there is a shortage of rental housing. We've got increased pressure on community services. We had an excellent event last week with several of our chief administration officers across the region talking about that. We've got employee shortages due to the lack of affordable housing, and consequently, we're looking at a labor force that needs to be replenished. People are experiencing rent evictions. We've got decline in small businesses as all of our disposable incomes fall. Next slide, please. So what kinds of housing have we decided to focus on? A lot of you will be familiar with this continuum of housing that the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation put together. It looks like it's a linear journey for many people, but in fact it's not. And so what we've decided to look at is the space that our labor force is needing. In large part, our labor force here is a service sector labor force making between $15 and $25 an hour. That means an affordable rent would be in about the $900 to $1,200 mark. So what we're learning is that perhaps non-market affordable rentals is the opportunity that we should be focusing in on. Next slide, please. So many of us didn't help create this housing crisis, but it really is up to all of us to deal with it, to learn more about it, and to try to figure out what the solutions are. We have Canadians spending an average of 35% of pre-tax income on housing before the pandemic. Now, that figure is 55% of income being spent on housing costs. That means there's a lot less money, up to 20% less, being spent in our local businesses as families redirect their spending to shelter. Next slide, please. So here's the opportunity. How do we not only create affordable housing, but affordable housing in perpetuity? So this whole community approach is emerging, where we can look at a nonprofit community-owned housing, which it has affordability at its heart in its mission. We can look to increasing our municipal engagement, and we can look at the social finance tools where we can explore how do we collectively lend, spend, or invest our dollars to create more community wealth to help solve this problem. It is my great pleasure now to introduce Jack Vanderkoy and Marilyn Struthers, who have been leading the social finance and affordable housing group for the last 2.5 years. We are grateful for their leadership, and they are going to be introducing us to all the players involved in the Pro Forma project. Over to you, Marilyn and Jack.
Thanks, Roz. Great introduction. And I think every time you speak to this, it reminds us how important this work is and how we have a vision for solutions. And so I'm always encouraged when we actually start digging deeper and seeing the community involvement to actually come up with solutions. So the question we asked ourselves is, how do you get to affordable? Everybody we talk to says numbers just don't work. And so first of all, I'd like to just talk briefly about what is a non-market developer or a nonprofit developer and why are they so important? The next slide, please. Next slide, we've seen the housing spectrum already. So first of all, a nonprofit developer is not an oxymoron, but it is a developer and builder. So I'm using them interchangeably, but they do have very specific roles who use their expertise to make a tangible difference for the good of the community. I've got a few examples on my next slide, but these are organizations, some of them are charities, or some of them are run by co-ops or by church groups, but their whole goal is to be able to provide affordable housing to better their community. They use their tools and their ability to leverage knowledge to bring down the cost to build a home. Earlier this afternoon, Marilyn and I met with one of the next slide, please, met with one of the principals of Raising the Roof. And very exciting. And they said, you know what, we can help. We can make this work. And so that was very encouraging. So I've just listed 3 nonprofit developers, builders. Redwick Park Communities, familiar to some of us, they actually do operate in our area. More Barrie way, but they have spoken to us in the past. I've shown their website on there, and maybe Jess, you can put that in the chat for others who might want to look them up. And their vision is, or mission is, to build safe, affordable, hopeful communities that support families and individuals. I love it. It's complete, right? Raising the Roof with the people that we met with, and they work together with community builders and to basically take people who need to learn a trade and they actually train them on site. And so they're sort of solving 2 problems. Number one, creating housing, and number 2, they are raising a workforce. And so their mission is, we work towards a day when all Canadians have access to a safe and stable home with the support to achieve their potential. And then Habitat for Humanity, very well known across the country, across the world, really. And we envision a world where everyone has a safe and decent place to live. And Habitat for Humanity focuses on home ownership rather than rentals. So again, a unique organization. There's more, but I thought, let me just mention 3 of them right now. If I could, next slide, please. So what is a pro forma? People ask, you talk about pro formas, and again, it came out of our question, what do the numbers really look like? And I'm an accountant, so I can't help myself asking these kind of questions, because at the end of the day, if you're going to build something, it needs to be financially feasible and sustainable for the long haul. So a pro forma is essentially a calculation. It uses several assumptions, and through that, we determine the costs of a building project. They will show the funding and operational return on investment or funding gaps, and then identify creative solutions to the above. The pro forma will show how concessions and social financing can enable increased affordable units in a mixed-use project. But I warn you, it is not a business case. A business case is much more complex than what a pro forma is, but a pro forma gives you some idea of how you can actually get this done and what impact concessions will make. And on the Institute's toolkit, if you go on their website, we have a fairly rudimentary pro forma, but it also shows the impact on rental rates of concessions that we can get either through federal, provincial, or local governments, as well as social finance. Next slide, please. So with these big questions, we met Krystal Valencia from Rental Rescue at our event back in November. Actually, a few of us met her before that, but I was at the event that we held in November that that gleam in the eye said, hey, there's something we could do here. And she had connections with the UofT Rotman School of Management, and the 2 of them created a collaboration with us to actually do a pro forma. And so we identified 4 properties in our region, which are owned either by the town or a not-for-profit entity, and gave them to Pelech, who is the executive in residence at the Rotman School of Management, and gave them to his MBA students, and he basically led them to identify what could be built given as of right zoning on these 4 sites in our region. Next slide, please. So here's the team. We had asked the students to participate, but students, they move on. So their term was up at the end of, I think it was in April or beginning of May, and they've moved on. Now we have encouraged them to move to our beautiful area. I don't think anyone have taken us up on it yet, but they're amazing. They did amazing work under the direction of Pelech, and I will introduce him shortly, as well as Krystal, Valencia, who was kind of the glue that brought this whole thing together. Next slide, please. So the first property that we identified was the St. Clair Place in Owen Sound. Sylvia Statham is on our Zoom, and she will speak to this in a few minutes. Sylvia is the executive director of the Lutheran Social Services in Owen Sound, which is a not-for-profit corporation that operates St. Francis Place and Corbett Place in Owen Sound. St. Francis Place is a 78 units community housing building for seniors and those with special needs, and 70% of the residents are rent geared to income and 30% are at market. Corbett Place is a 24-unit life lease building. And Sylvia is also executive director of Lutheran Outreach Ministries in Owen Sound, a registered charity and not-for-profit corporation that has purchased 6 buildings adjacent to St. Francis Place to create affordable housing. So if there's anybody in our community that knows about affordable housing, Sylvia is it. So Sylvia, I'm going to pass it on to you. Maybe you can share some of your learnings from this project.
Thank you, Jack. Well, it's been very challenging, and for 3 years. 3 years ago, we heard from Grey County that they had $3 million for us. They knew that we wanted to develop more on our site, and so they've been very flexible. We didn't know how that $3 million would work. And in the end, it's 1.6 million will help us build the building. And then 1.4 million will give us operating dollars for 20 years at $70,000 a year. And we hope to build this year. We are shovel ready. We just need the approval from CMHC. The mortgage will look like about $12 million, and CMHC is giving us $3 million forgivable, which is a real help. And then the balance, we've been very fortunate as Lutheran Social Service and Lutheran Outreach Ministries. We will be putting in 1.3 million. Just the land that we already own, and that will 1.3 million will help build the building, and then we also have operating dollars to help throughout the years. And that's because St. Francis Place came to end of mortgage in January of 23. So now that we don't have a mortgage payment for St. Francis Place anymore, that will give us funds to build and operate St. Clair Place.
Thanks,
So
thanks, Sylvia.
It's been challenging, but I must say, working with partners around the area, it makes it fun.
Thanks, Sylvia. And I like your comment, challenging but fun, right? I always wonder. But Sylvia, you just mentioned something really important, and that is being able to leverage existing assets. And one thing we learned from the from this project was that like a single standalone is very difficult to justify from a cost perspective. But and that's why I think we really want to encourage a regional approach so that we can leverage off of existing properties to be able to help finance new properties. And so again, that's a real key learning that we picked up here. And again, Sylvia, you have shown that it is not one party that's going to solve everything, right? So you've got sort of funding sources from various parties, and then you're also looking for donations as well, right? And again, that's huge because that's kind of free money. And so again, kudos to you for being shovel ready, and we're looking forward to seeing this project complete. Before I go on to introduce our next project, I just want to remind people, please put your questions in the chat. And also you may have comments. And so again, there's a time for discussion at the end of this presentation, but we'd love to hear from you. What are you thinking about when you hear about nonprofit, non-market housing sector? What comes to mind for you? Is it social housing? Is it market rentals, but slightly below market? So give some thoughts, and we can discuss them later on in the program. Can I get the next slide, please? So another project that was looked at was the Godfrey Apartments, which is owned by the Rotary Club of Meaford. Phil Kant, who's part of our group, part of Meaford Rotary and chair of the Godfrey Committee. Phil's no spring chicken. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that, Phil, but you just turned 80 back on June the 2nd. And your 7 grandchildren and your dear wife, Trish, of 59 years, and she just turned 80 herself, throw you a big party. And obviously that's wonderful when you got kids who are willing to throw parties for you. Phil spent 40 years with CIBC, 15 as CIBC Agriculture Commercial Manager in 4 different branches, and 12 years as CIBC District Manager in 4 different districts. So strong banking background. He's also a CPA, and so he's in my club. We talk the same language. Phil's been a Rotarian for 27 years in 3 different clubs. He's also been on 8 municipality of Meaford advisory committees. And as hobbies, he takes care of his huge property where he's got lots of work to do, and that keeps him out of trouble. But I always say when you cut the grass, that's when you do your best thinking. Isn't that right, Phil?
That's right.
Let's move on to the next slide and then let Phil share some of his learnings from the program.
Okay, the first thing I want to say is that how do you bring alive an affordable housing project to conclusion which can't be financed due to the high cost of land build and can't cash flow expenses due to the low tenant rental income? I'm going to sort of give a little bit of history of the Godfrey. It was built in 1958 and has 32 units and was a nurse residence. The apartments are 450 square feet, and they're very small. Our average rent at the Godfrey is about $740 a month per tenant, and but it does not turn over. Through COVID, we only had 1 person leave us, and that was a death. And this year we've had 3 people leave us, and the rent for these 1 bedroom apartments be about $901. So we keep right within what the County of Grey band is on affordable housing rentals. I just want to talk about a couple of things of what it's like to deal with 3 different governments, the provincial and the municipality and the federal. So we are governed by the Ontario Tenant Act, and we're allowed 2.5% rental this year. When you take into account that your leases are over a year, it works out to about 1.7. So at the Godfrey, we will be increasing our rent by $4,735 this year. Now we have expenses, and so we're talking about what the government can do for us. I'm going to tell you what the government doesn't do for us. We have the federal carbon taxes, which are going to eat about $925 into our expenses this year. We also have our tax bill, which is around 30, our tax and water and sewage bill, which is around 31% of our expenses. So in the municipality of Meaford, because of their infrastructure of water and sewage and that sort of thing, we are seeing an increase every year of 10% on our sewage bill, which works out to about $34,000 a year, or is costing us about $3,450 this coming year. So if you take those two expenses, you'll notice that it's $4,375. So you'll notice very quickly that our expenses diminish very quickly. Now, if we have an eviction, which takes us 3 to 6 months to get rid of a tenant, the Ontario government now requires us to use a paralegal. That'll cost us about $2,000 to do that. So if you lose 6 months rent, you lose about $5,000. This is this is a very tough business. Very, very tough. And I'm looking at it from the other side. Jack is looking at it from another side of how do you pull this off for an affordable housing project. But the expenses do really eat you, and is something that you have to look at. The next thing I've said on the slide is about municipal roadblocks. I have talked to the councils over the years about the water and sewage bill. This is just unbelievable what we pay there. And I'm going to say no more about that. Now, Jack has mentioned about the discussion on leverage, our present asset, and purchasing another apartment complex to increase affordable housing. This was probably one of the most interesting discussions that we had. I calculated that if we were to go out and buy a 10-unit apartment for off the Godfrey asset, that we would probably have to use about 20% of our cash profit to do that. So, because you probably could buy purchase an apartment for a lot less money than doing a new build. And I did this exercise, and if we were to double the Godfrey that way, we would probably have to use about 60% of our cash profit to do that. So that this is a real good avenue to look at. If you want to move to the next slide. Okay. Now, if we decide to redevelop our piece of property, the cost of hiring a professional planner and a lawyer to start the pre-consultation with the municipality and to develop a meaningful concept, knowing that CMHC monies is not 100% forgivable for a nonprofit, is concerning for our organization. We did a feasibility once before, and we had to give 50% back to the because we didn't go along with the project. The pre-consultation for the municipality of Meaford is waived. Also, the development charges are waived by the province of Ontario if you keep the project as affordable housing for 25 years, we're told. But your rent for a bachelor apartment has to be around $800, and for a 3-bedroom, $1,300. Of course, I'm a banker. I've calculated this all out. This doesn't work. Okay, so you have to look at different ways of doing this. Also, I'm going to say this, the challenge of nonprofit organization of getting financing through a Canadian bank is really challenging, really challenging. It's nonprofit. Just recently, the club that I belong to bought a church. We asked a bank for 20% of the purchase price. We have strong cash flow. We've got great assets and everything else. We were turned down because we were a nonprofit organization. Okay. That's a learning that has been very hard to take. Okay, the last thing I want to talk about, there is an acute need for affordable housing in urban Meaford. This community needs a plan brought together by a citizen group to address affordable housing. My statistics say that 25% of the households in the Meaford area probably are struggling. Okay, this municipality has no plan to address a Canadian national issue. I know the municipality of Meaford has identified municipal housing affordable measures as one of their priorities this council term. this has to be done, this, as far as I can see, has to be broadened out. We've got to get involved in Meaford. Thanks for letting me make this presentation.
Thank you, Phil. And again, if you got questions for Phil, feel free to put them into the chat. Phil, you mentioned a few really interesting things that I just want to point out. First of all, it's one thing to build something and something else to run it. And that becomes one of the challenges. If you'll remember from Sylvia's presentation, she's getting some funding that's going to produce $70,000 a year in revenues for them. But again, the operational aspect, it's not cheap and not getting cheaper. So that's an important one when you do your pro formas, that you also look at your operational return on investment, or at least break even. Purchase versus a new build. There's a couple projects right now that are happening, and I think in Owen Sound. And again, it's far more economical to buy an existing building than it is to build something new. So that's something to look at for nonprofits. And then the financing for not-for-profits. I'm really disturbed to hear that, Phil. I come out of the credit union world, and I'm not sure we were more friendly to nonprofits than the banks were. But I do know the Van City Community Investment Bank, they are more friendly to nonprofits, and I would suggest that they would be an avenue to look at. So, but again, great, learnings through the Rotman Group. And thanks to them, we were able to get a lot more clarity on these particular projects. Can we get the next slide, please? So there were two projects in Collingwood that were identified. Number one is the Birch Street property, 29 and 45. It's right in central Collingwood, Birch and First. This property is owned by the town of Collingwood and is being bequeathed to them through the Johnson Trust. Right now, I think there's 9 units in this complex, totally underutilized, but also way past its best before date. It's been built 40 years ago. Rotary did run it for a while, and they've now handed it back over to the town, I think 2 years ago. And so it is one of the sites that the town of Collingwood is looking at to repurpose it to affordable housing, or at least mixed-use housing, and bring affordable housing component into it. Next slide, please. Another site that was identified by the town of Collingwood was vacant land. It's a greenfield at Poplar and High. And again, the town is looking at opportunities as to what we can do, what they can do on that particular property. Both of these sites have now been offered, or not offered, but yeah, offered to the County of Simcoe. And they have their affordable housing master plan has identified these two sites, as well as several others in the county to create affordable housing. So hopefully the town and the county can work together to build something on there and make it work. But we presented these before we knew this was happening, and so the information we got from the students was very valuable in terms of understanding what is needed. Can we go to the next slide, please? So for all these projects, here are some of the learnings that we identified. First of all, I think there's no secret that there is a significant funding gap when building affordable housing to the needs of our communities. This can be partially offset by a mix of market rent and affordable rents in the complex. And so again, from an operational perspective, that makes it more feasible. But again, the more creative solutions we come up with, the more affordable units we can put into a mixed use complex. The funding gap can be further reduced through donated land, reduced or deferred municipal development charges, and other concessions, including mortgage rate discounts from CMHC and through municipal support to streamline processes. The time to develop a site is one of the highest, or it's a very high cost because time is money, and you use consultants for all of these things. So again, streamlining processes can shorten that timeline from conception to shovel in the ground. The remaining funding gap can be made up through a community investment offering. which gets paid out as revenues from the completed project come in. So I'm thinking of a community bond. Roz talked earlier about leveraging community wealth, because our municipalities do hold a lot of wealth, but leveraging community wealth to make these projects feasible. Typically, they would be used for bridge financing, not necessarily long-term financing, but there are several groups that are now offering community investment bonds, and they are quite successful. So again, that's something that we focused on, and realize that this may be required to meet that funding gap. Another learning we got from the group was that a prefab solution can significantly reduce soft costs such as design and financing costs during the planning process. So the group took a stick build versus a modular build, and even though the costs were similar, the hard costs were very similar, soft costs were significantly reduced because of your shorter time frame and cleaner design process. And so the funding gap still remains, but you can increase your affordable to market rental units ratio from 20% to 40%. And so that's significant, because if you can reduce the cost, you can bring in more affordable units and thereby make a greater impact in our community. So that's the last slide that we have from this group. And again, I'm going to encourage you to put your questions in the chat. And I'd like to now move on to hear from the experts. And so our first expert is Krystal Valencia. And if you've ever met Krystal, you know that she's got a lot of energy. And those of you who are at the November event have probably met her, and very, very excited when she was introduced to our community and said, you know what, I can help you guys. And so Krystal brings a wealth of experience and knowledge, making her a valuable asset in a variety of professional settings. Her ability to seamlessly transition between the nonprofit, private, and public sectors reflects her adaptability and commitment to creating a better world. How do we make a difference? Krystal's infectious enthusiasm is a driving force behind her work. Her positive attitude and genuine passion for her projects inspire those around her, including us, creating a collaborative and motivational atmosphere. Rental Rescue, which she will talk about, empowers Canadian nonprofits to compete in the real estate market through acquisition of existing affordable housing stock, retaining affordable rental rates, and safeguarding tenants at risk of precarious housing or homelessness, and hence the name Rental Rescue. So Krystal, welcome, and so glad that you could join us this evening.
Thank you so much, Jack. And I'm sorry, I'm actually in Meaford right now with my partner at Pom Poms on site. We love it here down here. So I really appreciate being a part of it, being a part of the conversations within the Institute, and having the opportunity, Marilyn, Roz, and Jack to really just try it out based on what our hypotheses have been, and how we can actually move forward with potential projects. So yeah, this has been such an exciting opportunity. So as Jack said, in November, I spoke at the Meaford Town Hall for the Institute's Housing Summit. And from there, we determined that there were opportunities for us to potentially explore affordable housing options and what those solutions could be within existing sites. So we took over the last 3 months, we had some students from Rotman and partnerships within the private sector to actually analyze these sites and compare potential market solutions, and compare what a prefab might even look like, and kind of go from there. So next slide, please. So I don't have to tell you all this, but we know that we are in a housing crisis, and we recognize that we want to provide these disruptive solutions that not only protect the assets within affordability, but also enhance them to keep meeting the evolving needs and demands of the community. And we're not the ones to tell you that we can really support on what potential solutions are. But we know that a big part of the potential solution is that local nonprofits, community-based organizations like the Lutheran Social Services and the Meaford Club, and even other nonprofits, especially around what the Institute is doing to disseminate information, where people are really struggling, and we're hearing the same kind of trends that people are struggling to retain and maintain the affordable units, and even developers are struggling to make to make the numbers work in the private sector. So a significant number of things that kind of contribute to these issues. The first is aging infrastructure. The second is financial constraints. How do we pay for it? And that's what Bo will also help to answer in the following slide, in the following conversation. And then the last is rising costs of necessary renovations. And what we've recognized especially is that sometimes we'll take outside money, they'll inject it and they'll kind of bring it, take it back out. Whereas if we were to really work with the local players who want to contribute to the affordable housing solutions, that will help actually keep the money within the local markets. So that's another piece that we've really identified. Next slide. So we are committed to disrupting the status quo. We recognize, all we know right now is that what we're doing is not working. And so how can we provide potential opportunities and solutions and align ourselves with people who want to support the greater good of our community and some of our most vulnerable populations. And by collaborating with us, we've really learned, I feel like we learned a lot, both in strengths and in shortfalls. And I think that it's a matter now of just trying to move forward in the best possible way that is inclusive, sustainable, and fair. Next slide. As Jack said, Rental Rescue empowers Canadian nonprofits to compete in the real estate market at market speed. But we do that through building acquisition retention of rental rates. So we created a financial model that allows for us to do that and still so keep affordable units, but also mix in the market, and then also safeguard existing tenants. Next slide. We do this through proactive acquisition and strategic management by injecting private sector partnerships. And we try to ensure that housing accessibility is accessible, sustainable, and stable for the communities moving forward. Next slide. So these are the key components that we provide. I realize that there's a typo, it's sustainability and integration, but the two that I really want to highlight in terms of what we've been able to, or the three, I guess, that we've been able to do through this project was the needs assessment, the regulatory support, and funding and finance expertise. So next slide. So with the needs assessment, we conducted a comprehensive needs and understanding that specifically was specific to the different areas that we analyzed. So that's Meaford, the two sites in Collingwood and in Owen Sound. And we did this through a variety of different methods, both from municipally and federally available data, but also through just other private sector comparatives and partnerships that we have kind of aiming to have those conversations. Next slide. So these are some of the kind of potential solutions that we have identified, and not to say that these are the solutions, but these are potential ones that we could focus on. So the different land parcels, the potential infill project, existing units, and how we can leverage or redevelop without the potential of evicting or evicting people from their long-term affordable spaces. And last is a redevelopment. So the key consideration within what we kind of identified in Collingwood in particular, well, on every site, was the as of right zoning and regulatory support. So we really tried to identify, instead of trying to create a hypothetical situation that we would like for it to be, we identified what the existing situation was, and how can we kind of create minor tweaks or create the correct partnerships and support in order to actually move forward in a tangible way as the logical next step. And next slide. And the one thing that I wanted to really highlight is that you know, we can do all of this work, but at the end of the day, the location is really the primary focus, because we can't change how close it is and how accessible it is to the very necessary you know, day-to-day programs that are available. So whether that be the elementary schools, and this is the example in Owen Sound, but there's the elementary school, there's a public library, there's grocery stores, etc. And as long as there is some level of access to these different social supports, there is an opportunity to make these locations more usable for the tenants that need it most. And now I'll pass it over to Bo to talk more about the affordable pieces.
So thanks, Krystal. And before you do that, I'm going to introduce Bo, because I've been waiting to do this for a long time. But thanks, thanks, Krystal. And again, some of the things that you just mentioned, preservation versus building new is so important. And sometimes we focus on what we can build, but I think your focus on preservation, I think, is really important, and that we as housing providers understand that's an important component. Krystal, can you maybe give us some idea what communities you're working in right now? Are you still there? Maybe not. Okay. Oh, there you are. You're muted.
Sorry, I'm actually trying to see if there's another space that I can go to that's a little bit quieter so you can hear me better.
So what communities are you currently working in, Krystal?
So the communities that we're currently working in is primarily in Hamilton. So our first building that we've acquired successfully without any government subsidy has been in Hamilton, and it's an 8-unit building that is that is transit oriented. We have another building that's well, we've been analyzing buildings all across Ontario, including in Southern Georgian Bay. There's some interest in Owen Sound from the private sector as well. And potential developers who would want to support in healthcare development in particular. We have a private developer in Listowel outside of Stratford. We have interest with interest in United Way in Toronto, Hamilton, and Huron, the Huron County, Perth, Huron County. And then the last is a huge development in Ottawa, which is 2,500 units, 900 of which are managed by Rental Rescue for affordability, and it's a mix of bachelor, 1-bedroom, and 2 bedrooms. So everywhere, and we've only existed for about 6 months, so we're trying.
That's very impressive, and thank you for sharing that, because you're a busy lady, so keep it up. But I'm glad you're having a nice vacation in Meaford. Someday you may want to move here, you know, it's like a not bad area.
Oh, don't remind me. I'm trying. Housing market's a struggle for everyone.
Yeah, well, it's a little bit cheaper here than Toronto. Anyways, thanks, Krystal. And on to Bo now. So Bo is our math guy. I call him the math guru. And so if you're not a math person, the nice thing about Zoom is he won't be able to tell that you're falling asleep. But you know what? Bo is fascinating. I mean, he's so engaging, and I can see why the students love him, because he just totally engages them, mentors them, and brings out the best in them. So Bo is the executive in residence at the Rotman School, where he teaches and mentors MBA students in experiential learning, including growth project consulting and sustainability, and supports MBA students seeking paid internships. Bo is a retired investment banker and a former consultant who is passionate about teaching and mentoring students throughout projects. He has worked as a lecturer, coach, and facilitator with Mayor Wilson, and currently sits on the advisory board of Touchpoint Strategies. He was previously appointed as an entrepreneur in residence at Humber College. Bo holds a bachelor's degree and an MBA from York University. So Bo, you come to us with great credentials. You've been a cheerleader in this program, and you have given us more information than we could absorb in a meeting. But why don't I give the floor over to you and let you talk about, yeah, what did you, how did you find this project, and maybe some reflections from your students as well.
Perfect. Thanks, Jack. And as Jack mentioned, the students have dispersed. And so somehow, some way, I've got to summarize a lot of work done by 4 or 5 students on this project. And if it sounds like I did anything, I'm apologizing in advance. This is all work done by students. But basically, 2 projects I'm going to talk about. One is that the students analyzed the Birch Street properties that were referred to earlier. And the work that the students did was specific to Birch, but it could be generally applied to any low-rise development. And in the case of Birch specifically, just to give you a high-level feel for the numbers, it was slightly under a 50,000 square foot development on the 2 properties. It was slightly under $30 million in terms of total cost. And so if you thought about the cost per unit, it was around $600,000. $600,000 per unit. Now, the first thing that the students, and the students did a unit analysis in terms of size of units, mix of units. They did a very detailed costing analysis. They created income statements, which define the net operating income of the projects and the debt capacity of the projects. And all of that gave rise to defining how much in debt and how much in equity was required for the project. So when we talk about the identified shortfall, that's effectively the amount of equity that's got to be invested in a project to make it make sense. The one thing that I wanted to just highlight initially in terms of the variables of costs, the students analyzed the traditional construction versus a modular construction. And because of the fact that we felt that a modular prefab approach would save some money, and typically it would save somewhere in the order of 5 to 10% of the cost of the project. And that is more in terms of soft costs, because of the fact that you have to spend less on architects and design, as well as time. And time is money. So capitalized interest and sort of the speed to getting to revenue. So you can appreciate that 5 to 10% of a $30 million project is quite significant. So I just wanted you to keep that number in the back of your mind. Now, what happens is because of the inflation in costs and because of the fact that we are having 20, 30, 40%, depending on what the math allows, of the rents as affordable, the equity requirement for this type of project is close to 50%. So your equity that's going to be required for this project is 40 to 50%. The debt that you could actually raise relative to the rents that you're charging is going to be around 50%. So if you thought about a $30 million project, this was just under, let's say 28 million, you're talking about $14 million in funding that somehow, some way, the sponsors, the proponents of the building, I don't care whether it's a private sector, purpose-built rental by a private landlord, or an affordable housing project on behalf of a non-market developer, somebody's got to come up with that, call it $13, $14 million. And if you thought about a condo version, I just want to kind of highlight that, the same issue arises in a condo, but the equity burden in a condo development is put on the condo buyer. So when a buyer shows up to buy a condo, they're actually not borrowing money from the bank on the basis of the condo. They're borrowing money from the bank on the basis of their income, because the condo, even if they rented it, wouldn't even come close to covering a high ratio mortgage. So that comes from somebody's income. So there's always equity required. There's this sleight of hand in terms of putting the equity burden on the buyer in a condo development, but in a rental development, it's got to be the project sponsors. So that shortfall has got to be sort of covered. And what we do, or what the students did, is that they did a future forecast of the property and what the value of the property would be in, let's say, year 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And over that period of time, and let's say 10 years, what they found is that this property, on a relatively conservative basis, is that on a relatively conservative basis, this property would be worth an additional $7, $8, $9 million in year 10, and that's the net present value discounted to today of that future value. So so I want to highlight that the minimum criteria under CMHC's preferential funding program for this type of development is that a minimum of 20% of the units have to be affordable. 80% can be market units. And these market units would not be subject to any kind of rent control, because this property is obviously a new property post the rent control timeline in November of 2018. And so the market units would increase, or could potentially increase, with markets, while the affordable units would, let's say, increase at a 1 or 2% a year, something nominal. But that provides a support for that conservative valuation of the future value. And it's that future value that justifies, and one can feel comfortable that it could actually support a bond offering. And we've assumed a bond offering of something in the order of, let's say, 6%, or $6 million rather. And the students actually went to the extent of mocking up a community bond in terms of an executive summary, a PowerPoint presentation, and a full offering memorandum for a hypothetical community bond offering for this building at $6 million. And again, $6 million was sort of chosen because of the fact that that provided a buffer to provide further conservatism relative to that $7, $8, $9 million increase in future increase in value. And so what happens is that now that we understand that our gap between our equity requirement of $10 million or $11 million and that $6 million community bond, we could actually go back into the pro forma and make some decisions associated with the property. Things like, every $25 discount that we could get on the hard costs, that's worth over $1 million. If we reduce our affordability, the number of units that we offer that are affordable, we could actually reduce or add anywhere from $1 million to that shortfall. So there's a whole bunch of kind of elements within the design of the property that could actually close that gap between the $10 million shortfall and a $6 million community bond. And so we could do that within the design of the property, but obviously if there's anything associated with grants and subsidies, that would add to it as well. So basically what the students were able to model is that a community bond of $6 million, some design elements within the development itself. But the big point was that we knew what degree of design elements we had to adjust for, because assessing the potential for a community bond was really important in terms of defining that net gap. So hopefully, again, trying to kind of keep this general. Hopefully I kind of didn't lose many people, but I know that there's a couple of questions. So before I got to the next scenario that the students analyzed, would this be a good time to throw in some questions?
Yes. I just wanted to double check. So you're done your presentation, right, Bo? So you're
No,
willing.
I've got one more slide to go.
Why don't you just give us we are running a bit late.
Okay. Okay.
And so, why don't you give us your one quick slide, and then
Okay.
maybe Krystal a really quick little. Krystal wanted to say a few words, and then we got to get into the discussion because there's lots of discussion in the chat.
Okay, so the other project that the students analyzed was the Godfrey Apartments, and that was the earlier problem that Phil talked about. This is 30 plus units, but all the units are affordable. So if you actually ran a traditional real estate net operating income valuation on this property, it'd be worth about $1 million. And so if you thought about $1 million at 30 units, you're talking about $30,000 per unit. And the problem with these types of 100% affordable scenarios is that from a building condition perspective, you're still going to have to spend real money on maintaining this building. And over 20 or 30 years, you could actually expect to spend something like $150,000 or $200,000 per unit. And when you don't have the market units to support that, you are strictly going to be looking at rent subsidy scenarios. So one of the things that the students did is that they identified this opportunity to leverage the equity of the Godfrey Apartments and buy existing old stock buildings in the area. And again, it's a rental rescue model to buy them and preserve them. But the important part is that the preferential funding that you get from CMHC relative to the purchase and preservation of a old stock building only requires that 40% of the units be maintained as affordable. 60% could be at market. Now, these are all pre-November 2018 buildings, so they would all be subject to rent control. But with any vacancy, you could actually increase the rent associated with that market element. But even making conservative assumptions, what happens is that we analyzed a building in the Georgian Bay region that would cost us about $350,000 to bid on in equity. It was prospectively, it was had a possible potential value in year 10 that would be about $800,000 higher than the purchase today. And so effectively our equity of $350,000 could be paid off if it was funded, let's say, by a community bond with an incremental $300,000 or $400,000 in value generated. And if older 100% affordable properties like Godfrey used that equity to leverage to purchase properties that had a mix of affordable and market, they could actually build value that could continue to support a property like Godfrey. So the key is that all of these scenarios could be made to work because of the fact that there's an opportunity to have a mix of affordable and market units. And Jack, that's it.
Great, thanks. And that's a key point, right? The mix affordable to end market, because the market can support that. I'm going to move on. Krystal, can you be really brief? Did you still want to say anything in terms of your learnings, or shall we move into the chat to questions? Because there's several in the chat.
Well, I think that I can very quickly go through the 3 opportunities that we've highlighted now as like quantified outcomes from the from this project, and then happy to go through the questions as well. So now I'm outside of McGinty's, so can you hear me?
Yep.
It's okay, perfect. So the first opportunity is that this will be a phased approach. And some projects will need to be developed in phases, starting with the demolition of existing structures And that's not to say that we can't redevelop them and densify them. And that way we're not losing any affordable units, but we do have a opportunity to balance both market units with the attainable workforce units, as well as the affordable units for our most vulnerable population. Next slide. And the next is around the capital stacking. The more community dollars that we can raise, the more affordable units that we can create. And a mixed income model is the most sustainable option for this, as we've identified through the hypothetical situation in the offering memorandum from this 3-month project. And that includes the debt, like what the numbers are for debt, equity, costs, cost and expense, the gap in dollars, the grants that we could potentially access, and then community bonds. And we would hopefully like to raise around $10 billion across Southern Georgian Bay if we were to kind of move forward with this as in terms of next steps. And then the last opportunity is next slide, is that we know for sure that we are positioned in the Southern Georgian Bay area to create an additional 100 unit minimum mixed affordable attainable market units over the next 1 to 2 years, and we can do this entirely self-financed. So the three kind of key things that I want to ensure that everyone kind of takes away from this, or the last slide, is that one, the phased approach with key locations is possible, that the capital stack is possible with local investment, and that 100 units plus is possible in the next 1 to 2 years. And
Okay.
And
That's hopeful.
yeah.
Thank you, Krystal. I'm going to move this over to Marilyn. Now, Marilyn has been, I would say driving force, but our inspiration more than anything else with our social finance and housing group. And so Marilyn, can we maybe take a look at some of the questions that are in the chat?
Yeah.
And, we probably can't go into a lot of detail. We're a few minutes over time right now. But we do want to respect everybody's time and be done by 6. So Marilyn, have you seen any questions that we can take a look at?
Yeah, I do have questions, and we have a couple of people with us who are actually developing in some way, whether for profit or nonprofit. So that's pretty fun. Let me put these out, and if you want to raise your hand or continue to put questions in the chat that riff off, I'll try and keep an eye on those, and chat will, Jack will as well keep an eye on the chat. So I don't know if anybody else feels like they just had a quick MBA. That certainly was my feeling sitting through these conversations. But I want to tell you that we do have on the Wonderful Institute website our toolkit. And eventually we will have distilled this material, including this recording, and that will all be up on the Institute website for you, along with a great deal of other learning that we've undergone, I guess, in the last 3 years. So my first question is for Sylvia. Sylvia, Pamela Spence is asking, how do you keep the rents affordable? How do you ensure that they're affordable? And sort of what legal terms are there when a charity is offering affordable housing? Want to take that one?
Well, that all comes from the Grey County and previously the province. I mean, for St. Francis Place, they're rent geared to income, so the 70%, they pay 30% of their income, and that comes from the notice of assessment. And for the new build, 50% of the units will be affordable, and that comes from CMHC. So, and that's 80% of the median market rent. So just follow those guidelines.
So it's interesting to think that's a charitable commitment that the Lutheran Social Services holds on behalf of our community. And one of the things that we've just started a new finance table. If anybody wants to join, give me a shout, where we've got finance people in our community learning alongside. And we just learned together that legally, organizations like Sylvia's are actually bound by mission to provide what the charitable housing, right? Supportive housing or affordable housing. So as a community member, when we invest in a community bond, you're not investing in McDonald's. It's not the same deal. You're investing in a nonprofit or a charitable organization that legally is required to do nonprofit housing. They can't switch over and start selling hamburgers or something like that. Thank you for tackling that one. Phil, Carol Merton picked up on your comment that a citizens group was part of the gleam in the eye right now for Meaford to work with council. Can you just talk for a minute? Why a citizens group, and what are the advantages of engaging ordinary local people concerned about their community?
I believe the community has got to know more about the affordable housing approach. I'm going to make a statement that I have heard a couple of times. It appears that there is a feeling that Owen Sound takes on affordable housing for Meaford. So in other words, they don't have to bother. We don't have to have affordable housing in this community, but we have the households in this community that cannot afford the rent and other things, and are having to make decisions. And I really believe that we need more than the Godfrey apartment, because we're the only place that has an affordable housing complex in the municipality.
Hey, thanks. I'll just remind you, you can put your hand up. I may or may not be able to get all that in before I turn it back over to Roz, but I'll certainly work on it. And Jack, just for a sec, I want to throw that question to you, because Collingwood has a long-standing affordable housing task force, which I think you chair now. What's the advantage to for the municipality of having citizens weigh in on this?
I'm interim chair, I think. So if any of our councillors are online, you can correct me if I'm out of line. But anyways, this task force was instituted back in April 2021 with the mandate, with a fairly specific mandate to do research and give recommendations on the Birch Street property, as well as what other policy changes should be made in order to accelerate housing. The advantage, and then once that was done, our mandate was to work with a consultant and staff to develop an affordable housing master plan, which was just approved by council last November. And now we're looking for a new mandate, and the new mandate is looking like, we're having a meeting on that tomorrow actually, is communication and community engagement. How do we bring the message out into our community? And the advantage of a community engagement like this, number one, we've got 3 councillors sitting on the Affordable Housing Task Force, plus we have support from staff. But the beauty of a task force is that it allows us to just be open and share ideas and concerns with council and with other interested parties, and make recommendations to address some of these issues. So and again, our new mandate, we will be looking for new members, and we're really hoping to get a more of a cross section of the community in terms of businesses, in terms of lived life experiences, educators, etc. So we're trying to expand the group so that we can hear the voices from as diverse a group as possible. So I think I laud the Collingwood Council for initiating this, and I'm on board to continue because it dovetails nicely with the work of the Institute, and I do think we are making a difference.
Can I add some more into this, Marilyn?
Sure, we're getting narrowed down to the time, and I have one more question that I want to.
I was kind of devious on my answer because I do not want the Rotary Club to have to be the citizen group. Right. It has to be a group of citizens who really want to do something about affordable housing in the municipality of Meaford. We have issues, and the Rotary Club has ran this particular complex for the last 23 years. And we've done a real good job with it. But you need more units in this community, and it's not totally up to us, the Rotary Club, to put these in place. It's up to the community to come forward and do something about it. And I do not think it should be a municipal advisory committee. I believe it has to be a community-driven
Okay,
advisory committee.
good. So we have some models. There's some models emerging around our community of a community forum that work with council on these issues. You'll hear a little bit more from Roz about the deeper dive that we did quite recently. Bo, I want to throw you a last question. And Tom, I know you are a commercial developer and you have some questions about numbers, but I'm going to take that piece offline a little bit because I think those of us who don't have an MBA might tangle there. But please feel free to comment in the chat about Bo's answer to the question I'm going to ask, because it affects you as well. Really, Bo, what is the role of commercial developers in our communities? We figured out the role of charities and non-market housing. We're hearing often from developers that it's tough to build to a $900 a month rent. What would be the short answer on the best role for developers in supporting this work?
It's almost impossible for a developer, a private sector developer, to make the math work in terms of putting up the equity and looking at the future value of the project and providing affordable units. Okay. The only reason our math worked is that we were able to kind of rationalize a community bond that had an attractive rate on it, high enough to entice people to invest, but way lower than what a private sector landlord would do from their own return on equity targets, which could be as much as 15 to 20% plus. Okay, so it's almost impossible without the private developer feeling somewhat philanthropic and saying, I'm going to leave some money on the table. But just the raw math of it, it makes no sense for a private sector developer. They won't make the math work and achieve their return on equity targets. So there has to be a community approach where the community is prepared to accept a reasonable rate of return, but not the same rate of return that's targeted by private sector developers. So there is no other solution mathematically. There's always grants, there's always that kind of stuff, right? But in terms of the raw math, there is no other solution than communities finding a way to support the projects.
So Tom, I'm going to give you the opportunity to respond to that if you want to. I'm asking you to do it very quickly, because as we've got our finance people now involved in social finance learning so that they can help us with this task, many of our folks have relationships with our local developers and have looked for where developers might support the work affordability. So bear in mind, we're looking at a target of between $900 and $1,200 a month. Do you want to just turn your camera on or turn your mic on and very quickly respond?
Sure. Thanks, Marilyn. Can you all hear me okay?
Yep.
In regard to, we just talked about the practicality of development. We have talked with Phil about the Godfrey Apartments and gave him an outline of a modular concept that we could create there for him. We have a 25-acre site in Meaford that we're working on to present to Shirley and the town council in regard to attainable/affordable housing. As far as Birch Street goes, we have submitted a plan. We gave a plan and showed a plan to the town of Collingwood. And in regard to the unit cost, like I just almost fell off the chair here. When Bo was talking at $600,000 per unit that these students have put together, I'm telling you that number on a modular basis that we can create is 300,000. I mean, it's an unbelievable difference and I can show you how it works. Poplar and High Street, we submitted a plan. Again, we gave a plan to the town of Collingwood about that and developing that site for about 150 people. And both of those sites, when you were talking earlier on, Jack, those sites have been given to the county. So the town really doesn't have anything to say about that right now because they've gone to the county. We've already talked with the county about the 29 projects that they've been given by the 16 municipalities in Simcoe County, and they're going to be running the show in regard to developing those sites. And we've offered them several opinions.
So Tom, I really don't want us to get into the details of site proposals and so on, but it sounds like you would be open to working around with us what kinds of things are possible to the rental levels that we are having to deliver. And if that's the case, we should talk some more. That would be great.
I don't know if we can, as Bo had mentioned about the reality of the rents versus the bill. You're talking $900 a month. That we don't even go there. It's not going to happen. But we can come up with rents, I think, that are reasonable. The last thing I'm going to say, by the way, is when I met with the Bank of Montreal, it was about 8 months ago, and I talked with them about financing. The Bank of Montreal has set aside $12 billion, read my lips, $1 billion for attainable housing for the next 10 years. Nobody knows anything about it. I don't know what the hell they're doing about it. And I know when I talk about risk, nobody wants to hear about risk. But again, we should all be taking a look at traditional financing. If the banks have set us, and that's only one bank, then the other banks, I think the Royal has done the same to a certain degree. We should be talking with them and pressuring them in regard to our housing, to get even traditional housing, but it's got to be in a different formula and it's got to be a little bit more risk, but I'll just leave it like that.
Thank you. Thanks so much. I mean, we have said to ourselves, we have to think more like financiers. We have to think more like developers. And in order to do that, we need members of our community who are financiers and developers to help us. Many of us didn't know what leveraging and stacking meant 6 months ago. So we're getting there. I'm going to go, Krystal, to you for one last.
Can I just so I just wanted to make just really clear. So Tom, the students actually didn't do the cost. They actually got quotes. So the two quotes came from EllisDon and our house, and both EllisDon and our house gave us really detailed proposals related to the configuration of Birch Street. So it wasn't. It was third party defined.
Thank you, Bo. The point stands. We have to learn from each other how to do this, and I'm going to give Krystal the last 2 minutes in this segment. Because Krystal, one of the things I've learned from you is to look for the hidden sources of money in communities. So, who would know BMO's got those billions of dollars sitting there waiting, right? But you've also been looking at sources of funds like endowment funds that exist, municipal surpluses we've been looking at, or municipal strategic investments. Do you want to give us 2 minutes on where are the hidden sources of funds that fall into that community wealth pocket that we might be looking to?
I would say that, as you'd mentioned around endowment funds, there are opportunities within community foundations and social service clubs who have these types of dollars that they would invest anyway, but they don't have they haven't necessarily considered affordable housing as an option. And to be quite frank with you, oftentimes these options don't exist. So we are creating it as we're creating these parameters for investment as we go along. And so that's one piece. And then in terms of the endowment funds with social services, I've had other conversations with some of the other Rotary clubs, for example, who have endowment funds and who are interested in creating, in actually doing a pilot at scale, and who also own a building and have these kind of opportunities. So we're not just creating and co-creating this process in Meaford, but we're doing it across a bunch of other circumstances that work. So that's firstly, and then the second piece, I would say, in terms of the work that we've been doing in the private sector investors that we've been able to to partner with and developers. It's really a matter of finding the right people that I want to work with, and that really you know, align with the personal values that I practice. And that way we know we're always on the same page, and we always have a champion within the agencies that are willing to advocate on behalf of us. It's not just the nonprofit and community sector anymore. It's a matter of speaking the same language among all of the stakeholders.
All right. So I would encourage people to Google community wealth. That's a movement that's growing across Canada and the US, looking at how communities invest themselves in the communities that we want to live in, and that includes affordable housing. And I thank everybody for some great questions and some challenging, thoughtful answers. And Roz, over to you.
Thanks, Marilyn. And thanks, everybody, in particular, all of us on this call, for your investment in your time and this learning opportunity. We've heard about several things. I'm just going to talk about briefly 3 and then go into the deeper dive that Marilyn was talking about earlier. Krystal, we just heard from you about social impact investing that more and more community foundations are doing. And that is a really interesting pool of capital that needs to be explored. Tom, we heard from you about modular housing, and that is one great example of an innovation that is now ready to be utilized. Jack, we heard from you about the need for community engagement and communications so that more of us across the region understand the need and how we could work together on that. So last week we had our chief administration officers talking about potential regional projects, a community engagement communications plan across 6 or 7 municipalities with the same objective: pooling all the resources. Think of the impact that could have. So lots of things that we need to be regrouping on and considering. I think that when Marilyn mentioned deeper dive, that's code for most of us, but what it means is this ain't easy. And if we're really going to do this, we really have to continue working together. We're hoping to have an event in the fall where we can work from input received last November in a workshop and in January in a workshop, both held in Meaford, by the way, so that we can collectively create a regional community plan for affordable housing. It could have several of the elements that we heard about today, and then we would have the collective will to move an action plan forward. So please stay connected on that. You can most easily stay connected on that through our newsletter. So please do subscribe at www.tisgb.com. It really is my pleasure to thank all of our speakers: Jack, Krystal, Bo, Phil, Sylvia, and Marilyn. The work you do, all of you, is so important, and we so appreciate it. I want to thank the Institute's Board of Directors, a dedicated working board. Thank you, June, for sharing more information about the Institute. We definitely want to thank our partners, sponsors, and all of you individually who contribute to our program campaign. It's going to launch with some fervor this month, so that we can continue doing this programming and to have the deeper dive event in the fall, and then follow that up with workshops, more about community bonds, more about some of the other elements that we learned about, so that we can bring a community plan to life to address this issue. We've got big plans for the fall. We need everybody to come on in. This is my last event as chair of the Institute of Southern Georgian Bay. It's been an exciting 6 years, a learning journey straight up. But I encourage all of us to stay connected. I'm not going anywhere, but we're going to be developing a collective leadership model where many of you are involved in doing the kind of programming that we're doing. Learning is lifelong. It's the 21st century. There's more to come. I hope that all of you will stay engaged, and I'm wishing everyone a wonderful evening. Thanks, everybody. Good night.
Thanks, Roz.
Thanks.